So let me make sure that I am recording because I tend
I
to
just I just hit
look
record,
at
Earl, so we're all set.
fantastic journey. Welcome. So let's officially get it done. Welcome. Today's webinar is hosted by DBHR through the Washington State Healthcare Authority. So you know this is an interactive training and we encourage you to ask questions and engage in the discussions to the best of your ability. The slides and the information will be provided to you subsequently. Typically, I think we send it to the Washington folks. They have um, loaded to your YouTube website and it's accessible there. So look out for the information.
I also
But
just shared a PDF version of our PowerPoint in the chat, so please you can access what was just shared.
fantastic. So you have it all at your fingertips. So this today's session, today's webinar, and quickly before we do that, a note about artificial intelligence. You're once again reminded that using it for note taking need to be authorized by DBHR, so be mindful of that. But to get straight into it, today's webinar is part two of a three-part series. I know that may certainly come as new information to you, but our first webinar last month was um, headed from burnout to balance, strengthening self-care for behavioral health professional. And this was all part of three-part series, really focusing on staff wellness and resilience for the folks here in FCS. So yes, we were asked and we are responding to that request to work with you, not only to provide information about wellness in terms of its principles and philosophies and concepts and practices, but to really get a sense from you as to how you are already incorporating that into your daily work and how you can strengthen that and find more real tangible ways of engaging with that individually, as a team, and hopefully from an organizational perspective. So that's the objective, the outcome, the goal. Today's particular segment of that is going to be really focused on staying grounded in crisis. Um, really developing, acquiring, having at your possession those emotional safety skills. So that's our scope for today. The expectation is that we will provide you with a kind of information that helps support your safety, client outcomes, and program sustainability, all in that collective. So let's get right into it. Our learning objectives for today. Um,
Okay.
You're muted.
my apologies. I just wanted to remind folks, and I think I took that cue myself, to mute if you are not speaking directly to the audience because it certainly impacts the quality of the webinar. So we want to make sure that people are cognizant of that. But to get back to it, our learning objectives for today is really to look at the neurobiology of crisis stress. How does crisis stress really impact your mind, the brain, and cognition? Really look at recognizing your own personal escalation patterns. How does stress really impact how you respond? And how does that escalate to the point where it oftentimes become either mismanaged or not managed very well? We want to look at some grounding and regulation tools that you can use in real time. It's really, as well as applying really boundary-based safety skills. So how do you establish those concrete and oftentimes sustainable limits that really safeguard your well-being while you continue to work with obviously a client population that can be challenging emotionally. And finally, we want to help you develop that post-crisis recovery routine. What do you need to do to harness and to best manage your own ongoing wellness subsequent to a crisis, and what are some of those practices and policies you can put in place to help guide you in doing so meaningfully and in a really practiced way. So lofty goals for today, but as usual, we always establish goals that we can stretch for, right? Anything that is easy to access is it's not within our wheelhouse. We want to stretch ourselves a little. So take a walk with me. We'll go down that road. Let's see where we get. So first and foremost, let's start by just kind of getting connected with each other, right? What I want you to do as we really focus and talk about wellness and how do we establish that? Oftentimes we all have, or I hope that we do, or oftentimes we may not put it and articulate it in that way, but oftentimes it is part of our makeup. Think of a mantra or an affirmation that helps you during your challenges and share that with us. You're not giving away your top secrets, but you're spreading the wealth, right? You're spreading that information. What kind of mantra or affirmation you use on a daily basis or often in your life that really helps you during crisis? Practice what you preach. I like that. The other one, not my circus, not my monkey. I love that. You are giving me some jewels I have to add to my box here. Deep breathing, find a way.
I love
Poor
this one.
planning.
This is just a moment, not my whole day.
Absolutely. You can do it. I haven't heard that one before. Keep one foot in the wave of infinite possibility. That is interesting.
Yes.
And Vi says, do it scared. That's one I'm going to borrow. Even if you're scared, just do it. Get into it. Put your feet in the water, right? It's a bad 5 minutes or a bad day. Let's just try it. So look at that. I think I kind of hit on your strengths. I think we've got more mantra here to fill a bucket and a lifetime, but it's great to know that people have them, hopefully using them. They are really, I call it the umbrella, right? While you're facing the rain of the world, right? You have that protection, something that really sparks your day, give you a reason not only to get up, but to stay focused during the day. Because as we know, we all need a reminder of the strength that lies within us that sometimes we take for granted or we do not really harness. But that's great. I am still trying to figure out which one works consistently for me. I think most of the times mine is circumstantial based on where I am in that moment. But I always, remind myself that if you believe it and you perceive it, you can do it, right? That's my way of really reminding myself that I'm capable because it's about your ability to really see within yourself, not just strengths alone, but the ability to kind of navigate the world and oftentimes in a way that you can know your limitations. You can't be all things to all people. Right? You can't pour from an empty cup and on and on and on. But it's great to have them in your repertoire, in your toolkit. I often say the mantra should not just be in your toolkit, it should be in your top pocket. Because you don't want to have to go to the tool shed to get it out. You want it to be on you, with you, that you can just immediately pull it out. But that's great. So let's keep the rhythm going. Let's kind of get into how you manage your life each day. What is your go-to comfort movie or song? Think of that. What sparks your resilience? Where I come from, we says, what suits your fancy, right? What keeps you in that mode? But tell me, what song or movie? Who says, I am Joyride by Roxy. Oh, I'm gonna add my playlist here now. Mary Poppins, Eye of the Tiger. Now, Eye of the Tiger, close to home, right? We're close to Philly. We know what that means. Lord of the Rings, Shit's Creek. That's a significant one. Surf's Up. Breakfast at Tiffany. Absolutely. You're giving it. Love it. I have, I don't know. I have movies and particularly songs. I think I resonate more to songs, right? I love Supreme Coltrane. Yes. So it's important to not only recognize that I always say you have within you what you need, not just to survive, but to thrive, and to also recognize where your best energy, spirit, and everything lies and should really lie so that you can engage in your most optimum functioning in your role professionally and personally, but at the same time, nourish that garden of your personhood so that you don't lose yourself while giving the most of yourself. Because as we I'm sure now we all came into this field, right? Because we all thought we can save the world, right? We can save the world. We can make sure that everyone else's life is better, it's optimal. But in doing so, we have to, that concept of when you go on a plane to talk about you having to take the oxygen first. Make sure your mask is on first. But it's great to know that we have those things. And that was a significant aspect of this whole concept of wellness, because wellness starts with you. It starts with those alarms that go off. It starts with really having that set of practices that really guide how you navigate the world, as well as recognizing your own personhood and how that may be impactful in each day that you engage in your work. So, thank you for sharing that. I guarantee you, I will be expanding my playlist and certainly spewing some of your mantra. So, if you hear it in the wind, it is me using it to the best of my ability. So, fair enough. But thank you for sharing. So we want to think of why emotional safety matters in FCS or generally across any kind of behavioral health or human service engagement on a professional level, but particularly for FCS. What we certainly know is you operate in a space, in a professional space where crisis is routine, right? You are doomed for crisis, so to speak. And I hate to use the term doom, but you will face it regardless. Now, you can act as though it's something to ignore or pretend or rationalize it or use euphemisms, but crisis is omnipresent and crisis will always be part of what you do. So it's important to recognize that, and that helps us to recognize the value and importance of having those emotional safety practices in place because we're facing, I always think of it in the sense that we may not be cops or firefighters, but we are always on the front lines just as much. So we have to be conscious and aware of that. We also have to be aware that chronic stress, impairs judgment, empathy, and the whole spiel of what we do. Ironically, the manner in which we operate in the space of our professional responsibilities, things are connected by chains, right? And if one part of the chain is broken, it tends to impact other aspects of it. So if our judgment is impaired, then our ability to provide services in an empathetic way, in a compassionate way, can be compromised, as well as those other aspects of what we do can certainly take a hit. So we need to see that connection, and it's all related to how we reconcile and manage stress. That is a basically omnipresent element in our work. What's also important as to why we need to look at emotional safety in terms of our operations is our own safety as staff, from physical safety to emotional safety as we take on other people's emotional I was tempted to say burden, but that's not an appropriate manner. But other people's emotional gear, right? how do we manage that knowing fully well we are oftentimes um, assisting and supporting people at their most challenged aspect of their lives? And hence, the emotional safety connection oftentimes starts with us. We sometimes have to be a good model to our clients or the people we serve in terms of recognizing and addressing concerns that can impact our safety. Ultimately, as we know, we have a litany of variables that may impact burnout, and that impacts staff retention, and it could impact all the other facets of our contractual obligation to the people we serve. So, retention of staff, readiness for audits, and demonstrating our outcomes as contractually obligated is also impacted by how we focus on our emotional safety and address our emotional safety concerns. So, what we've noticed here is that, in essence, emotional safety matters because it really bleeds into every aspect of what we do, what we're expected to do, how we do it, and how well we perform the roles and expectations. So, in essence, it's unavoidable. But we don't want to operate in a space where we're doing our best to skirt it or to avoid it. We want to actually, this is one of those instances where we want to work through it so that we develop those knowledge, skills, and resources that allow us to function optimally in spite of the presence, the omnipresence of things that will challenge our emotional safety. Does that resonate with you? Does that make sense? Any questions there? I certainly want to make sure that we're tackling those elements that you see as germane to your day-to-day work, that you know exist in your sphere of functioning, so that we're not really just honing in on emotional safety in a limited way. We want to look at it in its broad brush and broad scope. All right, I like that. Nicole said total sense.
Earl, it looks like Marissa has her hand up.
Go right ahead, Marissa.
Hi, thank you. I may be getting ahead of things, but you asked if we had any questions, and I'm wondering, are we going to define what we mean by emotional safety?
That's a great question. We will do our very best to actually get to that. And remind me, Marissa, if I don't actually provide you with a clear and definitive one, come back to me so I can make sure you leave with that. What we know for a fact is that emotional safety is not optional. Like I said, it's not something that you do because there's a possibility that it may actually be impacted, right? It really impacts the client outcomes retention. It really is a part. Ironically, emotional safety is a part of our skill set that we should consistently begin to work on and build on. And that's the message I want you to have the most critical takeaway. That is not an aside. It's a critical part of your whole repertoire of skills, knowledge, and resource to be able to really focus on that. So, and I probably want to get back to Marissa's point. When we speak to emotional safety, what does that mean to you? Let's kind of tap into that quickly. What does emotional safety mean to you? So it's not allowing emotions to be affected by others. Hmm. Okay.
The freedom to
Feeling.
express my thoughts and feelings without judgment or reactivity, not feeling tense, people are saying, feeling heard, keeping control of my own emotions, security, stability, and feeling heard, validating my feelings and the other person's, and being able to get to let go when I go home. Lots of definitions are coming in or
Yeah, and that's
meanings.
that's critical, and I'm glad that you shared. Thank you, because in essence, I don't want you to simply leave here with a formulated stuff, right? Something that you can just take and just say, this is what it means in every instance to everyone, because I don't think there's any such definition. Emotional safety really speaks to recognizing, like we talk about, where you are in your own emotional sphere and how the your interactions and how the world, how you really navigate your emotions in your daily engagement. And I think sometimes what happens is that the focus is so much on safety that we tend to lend a lot of the emotional safeguards to what we need to do to keep someone else from impacting us. Whereas in reality, it's virtually impossible for us to not be affected emotionally by the people we serve and the kind of work we do. So I don't want folks to believe there's some magic wand or some set of things that we can do that prevents us from having emotional reaction to things. And I think I love that, Desiree. That was just that's phenomenal, right? Having the comfort of knowing I can uphold boundaries and be validated without judgment. That's critical. It's about recognizing that we all have a way of responding to the world emotionally, and we have as much ability not to limit it, but to manage it while we actually engage in our life. So it's about continuous learning and evolving in terms of how we interact with the world in an emotional way without losing ourselves or protecting ourselves to the point where we restrict our emotional engagement with people. So it's a way of navigating the world in kind of a not just a safety, but the safest possible way while still giving of ourselves. Because as you all know, we can't operate in this professional space with these expectations without having an emotional connection to folks. Very good. I hope that kind of lends itself to a, because this is very nuanced. I think the distinction, the definition of it has to be nuanced to everyone. So the effect of crisis in our brain is profound, and that's an important element. From the amygdala that gets hijacked under stress to really understanding how we really operate in that space. So we can oftentimes get into that flight or fight response, which certainly can impair our cognition, our logical, our memory, our decision making. So it really stirs up a tremendous amount of action in our brain that requires a tremendous amount of, I call it, holding on to that steering wheel, right? So that we're going directionally where we want to go in spite of what's happening in the traffic around us. I think that's the analogy that is important to recognize here. You think of the physiological response to stress. You think of how that can have a structural impact long term if we're not cognizant and coping with it, and how it can make us susceptible to other more grave emotional and psychological challenges. So it's really understanding that our brain has a natural structure that ironically was built for us to manage stress, right? If you think of it, even in our most basic ways, we were designed to be in an environment where we have to be alert, we have to be resilient, we have to be able to cope with all the things that occur. So our brain is built in that way naturally, but we have to be able to hone in on it and really learn how to navigate that and understand that any sustained stress or distress can have long lasting and chronic impact in our functioning. So that's an important element there. And is there a problem? There may be a problem with the sound. Is
I'm not hearing any
Shannon's?
problem on my end. Are others
Yeah.
hearing a glitching problem or a sound problem? Okay, some are saying sounds fine to me, sounds okay for me.
Okay.
So, okay, good. So it sounds like the
Yeah.
majority of people are able to hear fine.
Okay. So I'm hoping that Shannon is able to kind of get that straight because certainly want you to get the most of it. So it's important as well for us to look at how that impacts our emotional dysregulation, right? How does it impact our ability to function in our professional realm from a perspective of integrity and quality of care? As we said earlier, once you have significant unaddressed or unmanaged stress that is really impacting your cognition, your ability to navigate those stresses, it can impact your professional boundaries. Oftentimes, if we're in that mode where we're simply just responding automatically to stress without really navigating and really filtering it, we can find ourselves oftentimes, you know, disclosing excessively. Like you can feel comfortable in that space where you're like, listen, if I just lay it out to my client that I'm seeing, listen, today has been a terrible day for me, so let me lay that out early. Sometimes that may seem like a great disclaimer so that you can have a way of parrying all stuff, but it can really compromise your professional role. So you have to be conscientious that you can't simply use what may come off the cuff and naturally to you to alleviate your stress in that moment. It may not lend itself to a good therapeutic environment. And that's important to recognize. You can become over involved in rescuing as well. If you feel compromised by stress, you can automatically assume that your client is in that same mode, and therefore you need to work for as opposed to work with. And you're doing a lot of rescuing when that is not your role from a professional standpoint. Or you can over identify and begin to share stuff that really crosses the line. So you have to be conscientious of how that kind of stress that impacts your emotional regulation or dysregulation can certainly impact your functioning, even in its limited consciousness that you may have of it. And it certainly can lead to other role and functioning challenges from documentation shortfalls. Um, I think if you're so stressed in that moment, instead of really being able to garner and remember the context of your engagement to document accurately and appropriately, you may not make those connections until your supervisors really review your progress notes and say, hold on a minute now. This notes look like a simply like a narration of what you were feeling in the moment, as opposed to the consumer's response to your interventions and how you use interventions appropriately. So sometimes we can't see those connections, like I talk about those chain analysis and those connections, but it certainly has clear and definitive connections if you're conscious of how it may impact your functioning, your decision making, your cognition, and all those roles that you're dependent on to provide the best level of care. And most certainly, if this is a chronic situation that occurs over and over again, it can impact your ability to manage your work to the extent that you may be at significant risk of burnout. So there is a trajectory that you have to not necessarily impede or stop, but you have to recognize how it flows so that you are conscious of the early warning signs so that you're taking actions early. Can you see the connections that I'm making to how not recognizing or not managing stress can really lead to a lot of professional impairments across the line? So we want to give you a level of consciousness about the widespread impact of unmanaged stress and how it impacts your wellness and your ability to function in your professional capacity as designed, as expected, as standardized. So there's an emotional safety continuum. And it's important for us to recognize that it's a continuum. And we have research that demonstrate the way of really looking at that. And I'm getting some feedback, I think. Okay. So when we look at it in terms of where we lie on that continuum, it's important to note that when we think of it through that prism of green, yellow, and red. And it's very common in our society. And that's important, Q, that we tend to look at things in that continuum, right? Green is you're regulated, you're flexible, you're curious, you have an awareness, you want to get a sense as to how you're interacting. If you're in the yellow frame, you have that kind of activation, that kind of emotional, immediate, kind of profound impact. You're rigid, right? Because you're in that reaction mode, you're oftentimes not able to be as flexible and see things through the lens of this is part of what's happening. I'm capable of managing. You're not using those mantra and those things to help you stay focused and help you stay connected. And oftentimes, when challenged, it's easy to become defensive because you already feel on guard because you're in a situation where you feel activated, overly sensitive to stuff. Now, when you're in the red, all bets are off. You're dysregulated. You're really in a space where you're in survival mode, so to speak, when you ought not to be there because the circumstances don't dictate that. But you feel that your most notable or your most desired way of responding. You're reactive, so you're significantly impacted by things out of your control, and you're getting into that battle of wills and battle of how you maintain power and control. Or you can respond in a way where you shut down, be like, I just can't manage this, right? This is out of my realm. This is beyond me. It is someone else's stuff. And I'm going to merely sit here and we talk about it like a fawn and hope that it goes away. By some will, it will just go away. So it's important to recognize where you lie in that particular continuum, particularly when you know or you're aware or you're made aware of particular triggers or circumstances that really impact you significantly emotionally. Now, we ask us to, before we go on to that, when you think of this, a question I would ask is, where do you most often get stuck? In your realm of emotional responses, where do you get stuck mostly? Green, yellow, or red? And I see yellow, yellow, yellow. Yes, right? Wow. Someone said the last couple of Fridays have been in red. And I think once you're able to kind of get that sense, it gives you a better picture of where you see yourself in that continuum. What I often suggest to folks is when you have a sense as to where you are, check in with a colleague or a supervisor and ask them where they think you fall. Because sometimes you'll be surprised your perspective of where you fall in that continuum may differ from another observer or proxy, someone who's viewing things from outside of you. So challenge yourself in that way. And I know you're brave. You're not going to be disappointed when you get the perspective because sometimes it aligns. Your supervisor may be able to say, hey, Marissa, I notice you're mostly in yellow, right? That's it's kind of where you are. So you're doing a good job of kind of staying in and now and you're shifting to green when it's necessary. And when you are shifting to red, you kind of look at your supports and you reach out and you get some supports as needed. That's the critical element of it. Really be able to recognize where you lie and know what kind of supports you need or it's accessible to you. That is an interesting one, Clay, that you find yourself in different states when you're relating to different clients. And that may be true for a lot of folks. So you may really have to ask yourself some hard questions, right? What about a particular client or interaction with a particular client pushes you more in the direction of that continuum? And why? So listen, that is an interesting one. I'm glad that sometimes, yes, our life experience can kind of dictate where we find ourselves more often, but we don't have to be comfortable in that space, right? We can aspire to move more directionally to where we find ourselves managing best. So what's also important is one, we recognize that where we may lie in our interaction in terms of that continuum, we could get a sense as to what's our personal escalation signals. What signals to us that we're moving more towards the red? And oftentimes, for most people, it's a physical reaction. When I feel my shoulder tightening or I feel like I'm getting a headache or my shoulders get tight, that physiological response often is the first signal for folks. As we said, a short fuse, yes. Or you have that emotional reaction. When you find sometimes your words and your thoughts or feelings don't align or they overemphasize what you're feeling in that moment. So that's an important element as well. Daniel said I stammer a lot when I'm tired. That happens oftentimes. Or you find yourself being struggling to connect thoughts, right? There's a big gap. And that may impact your cognition. For some folks, it may be, Earl, I have to be careful about making significant decisions when I'm feeling that stressed. Or when I make decisions, I find myself making decisions that may lend itself to me looking for a momentary relief, or momentary reward, as opposed to looking at the long-term ramifications of my decision. Or there's a behavioral component to it that you can also find yourself somehow reacting behaviorally to a sense of threat or feeling stressed. And that's an important element, right? When you find yourself saying, often find yourself either saying or acting in a way that speaks to the fact that this person or this circumstance is a threat to me and I have to immediately go into protective mode. So if you find yourself sitting with your supervisor, that often triggers that, and you find yourself with your hands clasped across your chest, or you're, standing like you're ready to go into a Roman wrestling match, you know that you're there. The hope is you can get from your supervisor, if you're sharing this information, an early sign that, hold on a minute, Kesley, I notice you are tense. I notice that, your words and your action is saying to me that you're not in a good space. Tell me about what's going on there. So sometimes it's important to help people kind of give us a cue and a reminder as to where they see us. A trusted person that can give us a proxy perspective that help us recognize what may not come consciously to us in the immediate. So there's lots of warning signs, and it may be different for different folks. And I think most of you have shared a tremendous amount of different warning signs that can give you a sense as to where you're moving more progressively towards the red zone. And I will shift it now to my colleague Joni, who will really get you into those coping mechanisms and how they can best inform your way of managing.
Yes, thank you, Earl. And just a note, I'm going to go through some of those coping skills and mechanisms, and then Earl's going to jump back in and provide some information about resources and worksheets. But just to let you know, I'm going to review these grounding skills. And so you don't have to write notes, and Earl has provided resources and worksheets that accompany each of these skills. So you'll have that information so that you can use grounding skills in the moment. And when we talk about grounding, it really is about nervous system regulation. It's not simply relaxation. And these tools help to stabilize thinking and emotional control during crises. The first one we'll introduce is box breathing or square breathing. And it's a simple relaxation technique where you inhale for 4 counts, you hold that for 4, exhale for 4, and hold for 4. And you can do that maybe a cycle of 3, and that creates a calming rhythmic cycle to help reduce stress, improve focus, regulate for the nervous system. Very ideal for moments of anxiety or high pressure. The 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 senses grounding technique is a mindfulness exercise to manage anxiety by focusing on your surroundings through your 5 senses. So name 5 things you see, 4 you can touch, 3 you can hear, 2 you can smell, and 1 you can taste. And it's about bringing you into the present moment. It interrupts racing thoughts, it calms the nervous system, and helps you connect with reality. A cold water reset grounding technique uses intense cold water, often by splashing it in your face or using an ice cube to really trigger that mammalian dive reflex, which calms the nervous system and snaps you out of anxiety or panic by really helping to slow your heart rate and shifting focus to the intense physical sensations that you're now experiencing. Um, to do it, you immerse your face in cold water with ice for 15 to 30 seconds while holding your breath, or you can hold an ice cube to your neck or face, helping to reset your stress or that stress response and really bring you again back to that present moment. How to use emotion naming for grounding. Identify the feeling. Notice what you're experiencing internally. For example, you might have a tight chest or a racing heart, a churning stomach. Apply a label. Mentally state the emotion using a single word like anxious or overwhelmed or sad or frustrated, and create distance. Recognize I am experiencing anxiety rather than I am anxiety. And this bridges those raw feelings to conscious awareness. The feet on the floor grounding technique. Try to position yourself comfortably in a chair. Sit with your feet flat to the floor or stand with your feet hip width apart and notice contact. Pay attention to the soles of your feet touching the floor, feeling the texture, pressure, and temperature. Engage your feet, wiggle your toes, press each toe, then feel into the ground. Wiggle your toes. Notice the muscles in your legs and the thighs activating. Add breath and take slow, deep breaths, exhaling as you press your feet down to enhance the connection. And then feel that connection. And imagine your feet connecting to the earth's foundation, feeling the sensation of weight and gravity, and then incorporate movement, which is optional. Maybe gently stomp your feet and lift and drop your heels in a rhythmic manner to focus on the impact and release. Someone had mentioned what are the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 senses that we're really focusing on. So we want to focus on 5 things you can see, 4 you can touch, 3 you can hear, 2 you can smell, and 1 you can taste. And again, these are all included in the presentation, and Earl is going to go over some of the other resources that are available. How many people use some of these grounding skills in their practice? Yes, lots. Lots of thumbs up. Absolutely. And are they useful? Yes, box breathing, someone's mentioning. So let's move into some boundary-based emotional safety. For behavioral health professionals, this means setting clear limits, physical, time, emotional limits to protect both ourselves from burnout and compassion fatigue that Earl had mentioned a little earlier, and the individuals we're working with, clients we're working with, to create a trustworthy, really non-exploitive space for the person, fostering healthy models for clients, maintaining clinical objectivity, um, which involves consistent practice, supervision, and avoiding those dual relationships to really ensure ethical care. So remember, we're responsible to, not for, the client. Overfunctioning can increase burnout, and it really does work to disempower clients. Those boundaries protect both staff and the person um, who is in the recovery-oriented practice. Some of the key principles are client safety. Boundaries create a secure environment for clients to explore without judgment, acting as a structure for trust. Therapist protection, they prevent burnout, compassion fatigue, and emotional depletion, and it allows professionals to sustain effective care. It also clarifies the role, right? Boundaries define the professional role, differentiates it from personal relationships and managing expectations. We also want to be mindful of language that de-escalates crises. And word choice can either escalate a situation or it can stabilize a nervous system. To de-escalate conflict, we want to use neutral, empathic language, focusing on I feel statements, focusing on active listening. Remember all of those foundational listening skills, um, validating the other person's perspective while avoiding accusations or blame or sarcasm, and demands like calm down to shift from emotional intensity to problem solving. Some of those key strategies include showing that you hear them. I hear you're frustrated. Asking clarifying questions, offering small agreements, and suggesting a calm down break. So using I statements, I feel whatever that emotion might be when whatever the situation is because of the effect on you. So for example, I feel overwhelmed when the deadline is moved up because I can't manage my workload. So you can see different examples here. You have to maybe try, here are your options, or why didn't you? Use help me understand instead. And of course, calm down. We want to use words like, let's pause for a moment. We also want to acknowledge and validate what the person is feeling. Show that you're listening. Say things like, I can see why you'd feel that way, or that makes sense from your perspective. Asking open-ended questions. Tell me more about that. What are your biggest concerns here? And move into future-oriented language and solutions. How can we work on this together? What if we tried and offer a suggestion? We want to avoid saying things like, you never listen, that accusation or the blame. We want to avoid things like that may sound like demands. Calm down or just relax. That often escalates. I mean, think about your own lives and if someone were to use that type of language. So we really want to use language and choose language that helps to de-escalate situations. We also want to be really taking care of ourselves between appointments. We want to have micro recovery opportunities. A 2-minute reset ritual is a brief intentional practice to really shift from stress to calm. It might involve deep breathing. It might involve some of the box breathing or other skills that we just talked about. A physical release, maybe a shoulder roll or stretching. Um, Nervous system shaking includes different body-based techniques, maybe light movement, taking a short walk or doing jumping jacks. Physical pressure, maybe squeezing your arms or press your palms on the floor or wrap yourself in a heavy blanket for sensory input. Getting a drink, having some hydration, drinking water. Um, Walking, doing breath work, again, walking and doing some breath work together. And then these reset scripts for grounding or verbal or mental routines that really help to anchor you to the present moment using sensory focus, like the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 method. Physical actions like deep breaths or touching objects or affirmations like I am safe, or even drawing on some of the affirmations that you wrote in the chat earlier, some of those mantras, kind of helping you to reset so that you're able to kind of move into the next appointment with a calm nervous system. I'll just talk briefly about this because I want Earl to get to the resources. But emotional decompression, peer processing, supervisor check-ins are all ways after a crisis to really help regulate your nervous system, really help to kind of post recovery, post crisis, kind of help you in that um, feeling safe, that kind of getting that emotional safety. We want to find supportive people and safe places where we can feel comfortable. We want to let others offer comfort as they release calming chemicals. Sometimes that might be, a kind word from a supervisor or colleague. We want to allow that support. We also want to acknowledge and recognize that our reactions are valid and may be tied to a lot of the accumulated stress that we're experiencing. It's not just the latest event, but this idea of the stacking, the trauma stacking, that our reaction is really tied to this accumulation of events. And then finally, looking at supervisor support loops. Reflective supervision is a relationship-based professional development approach where supervisors help staff explore their thoughts and feelings and reactions to some of the challenging work situations. It helps to foster deeper understanding, new skills, and better outcomes for clients, especially in fields like mental health. Um, Safety escalation pathways are structural and create this step-by-step process which defines who to contact and what actions to take when a safety issue or emergency arises. So moving from that initial responders to, uh, this kind of has moved from the initial responders in a situation to higher management or specialized teams that you might have available that are based on severity of the situation to really ensure this kind of swift resolution of the situation and the accountability. We also want to identify what some of those debriefing norms are. What's the protocol for debriefing a crisis? What are some of the coverage protocols? What's in place if someone is managing a crisis? How's coverage maintained? So I'm going to flip it back over to Earl to talk about some of the tools that we that are available. And action planning activity um, tool is one here that he's going to review. And I'll put in the chat a link to the resources, the worksheets.
Thank you, Joni. So, more than anything else, I think I want you to see how really identifying and acknowledging the omnipresence of stress and how it may dysregulate you and how it may impact your professional responsibilities and how you function within your scope And then we look at some of those coping mechanisms or strategies we can use in the moment. We have to have them available to us, accessible to us. We have to have an awareness of it. And then we really put that into our daily kind of practices and repertoire. So we don't wait until we're in a crisis to then go looking for these things, right? We need to have them available to us, tune into them, really be able to access them as needed, and know which one is appropriate for that moment or which one really works for you. And it only comes from practice. You can't determine whether or not a specific grounding technique is going to work for you unless you practice it and it's become part of your natural response to things. So ultimately, once we have that, we have to have a good plan so that we're able to put an action plan in place. And it starts with really recognizing those early warning signs, really recognizing where we are in the continuum. Are we at yellow? Are we at red? And really have a sense of three good grounding tools that we're aware of, we've practiced, we know, we can certainly access immediately. We have a concept of an after crisis recovery plan, and someone talked about a pizza party after a crisis. We have to have something that we do individually as a team and potentially a department, and really have a sense as to who supports our work when we're in that mode. A general understanding of that, what that is clearly. So here is a good synopsis or a good template of how to operate the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 grounding techniques. And Joni did a good job of describing it at length, but it's available to you here as well as the box breathing, the grounding chair, and also really recognizing and using this map to kind of help you recognize what are unhealthy boundaries or what are healthy boundaries. Sometimes a boundary is not merely a boundary unless it really is appropriate for the time and setting. So it's important to know what's a healthy one and what's an unhealthy one, both in your personal and professional lives. So it's accessible to you. Kind of take a good look at it and recognize that. But in wrapping up, what's a reminder I want to lay out to you very clearly is that emotional safety is ethical, it's clinical, it's organizational best practices. It's not merely something that you use optionally. It is something that should be part of your consistent practice. It is a standard of best practice. It is an ethical way of operating. It puts you in a place where you are not merely operating professionally, but ethically, compassionately, thoughtfully, and with good regard for your safety and establishing great boundaries. Q, you're gonna get these slides and information, so don't worry. We'll get them to you. I think Joni just sent you the PDF, so you have that information available to you. I know we have a short time. There's a lot of ready-to-use worksheets, and they reflect all of your approaches. We look at my escalation awareness, so you can use this to kind of get a sense as to how you see your path of escalation when you're faced with stress. In the moment grounding. So these are worksheets that you can use individually, you can use with your team to practice and kind of get yourself geared up. I want you to know that's available to you. Your after crisis recovery and sustainability plan. If your department don't have one, this is certainly a template that you can use. So these are all templates and tools and assessment that you can use for yourself, introduce to your team, and constantly practice until it becomes your kind of natural to you, so that you have that available to you. In closing, I want to remind folks that we have part 3, which is kind of the capturing of all of this information and skills and assessment related to staff resilience. And part 3, which is coming up in the month of March on the 30th, it's focused on wellness is not a workshop, right? It's creating a culture that sustains staff. So as much as we do this in kind of a workshop stuff, we want you to understand this is more than just webinars. This has to be part of your whole realm and repertoire of how you operate in a space. So that information is going to be provided. We're going to have a great discourse. We look forward to seeing you all on March 30th for the kind of wrap up, the culmination of all of this, so that you can have a good toolkit, a good set of knowledge, skills, and resources that really allow you to expand your current wellness practices and help you really optimize your functioning with safeguards in place. Finally, I want to thank you. We appreciate your time and attention. Today's webinar, once again, was hosted by DBHR through the Washington Healthcare Authority. We'd like to remind you that the information in the slides are going to be available to you. Watch out for our upcoming part 3 and registration. Thank you all for your usual meaningful, engaging way of doing things. And I hope that the weather continues to be fabulous in Washington, and you send some of that good weather to us. But thank you all. I hope you have some meaningful takeaways from today. We look forward to seeing you for part 3. And on behalf of Joni and I, thank you. Have a great rest of the day. And I hope your week is as fulfilling as ever.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're most